Hello and welcome to Talk New York. Let's face it, most Americans are not concerned with immigration issues. After all, why should we lose sleep over individuals who choose to risk their lives to go where they are not wanted? But listen to this. This year, Immigration and Naturalization Services, the INS, will spend about $700 million on detention and deportation alone. Guess who's paying for it? You guessed it, you are. However, according to immigration advocates, the detention facilities are not worth that kind of money. The truth is, some of the people held in detention are law-abiding individuals whose only crime may be the desire for political, social, cultural, and economic freedom. There are several organizations who are working diligently to effect immigration policy in an effort to encourage positive change and make the system fair. Two such organizations are the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service and the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society, also known as HIAS. The Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society started in 1880 by a group of Jewish immigrants who found sanctuary in the United States after fleeing persecution in Europe. HIAS advocates on behalf of refugees and migrants on the international and national community level. Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service was formed in 1939 to help refugees generated by World War II. Joining me to discuss immigration and detention issues are Esther Ibrahimian, who is the Assistant Director for Asylum Concerns for the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service. Mark Hetfield is the Hebrew Immigration Aid Society's Washington representative and currently serves as the chair of the Washington Liaison Group, the Coalition of Washington Representatives for the National Refugee Resettlement and Advocacy Agencies. Before joining HIAS, Mr. Hetfield was an immigration examiner and supervisory appeals officer for the INS. Thanks for being here. That was a long introduction, and I hope I did justice with that. But the tasks that you guys take is also huge. And could you tell me a little bit about your organization, the Lutheran Immigration Refugee Service and Refugee Service?
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, or I'll just say LIRS, was founded in 1939 when Lutheran churches in the United States were very concerned about the refugees that were in grave danger during World War II. Today, the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service serves a broad range of immigrants and refugees in the United States. We tend to focus on the immigrants, asylum seekers, and immigrants who are most vulnerable. I just mentioned asylum seekers. It's in a very vulnerable population. And also, my work mainly involves people who are in immigration detention, which means they're being held in a detention center or prison during their immigration proceedings.
Do you visit the detentions yourself?
Yes, I do visit facilities
Could you
myself.
tell us a little bit about what is there, what are the conditions?
Sure. There are different kinds of detention facilities. One kind of facility is operated by the Immigration Service itself. And then another kind of facility is owned by the Immigration Service, but it's actually run by a private correctional corporation, like Corrections Corporation of America, for example. However, that's the minority of people who are actually in a facility operated by the Immigration Service just for immigration detention. The majority of people are held in local jails across the United States. These are jails that are used to hold people who are serving time for criminal convictions.
Murders.
Any wide range of crimes, and so you can imagine for an asylum seeker who has never set foot in the United States before arriving at the airport and asking for asylum, to be placed in a jail or even into an INS-operated facility, which is essentially in operation just like a prison, that's an incredibly scary experience. And these people are often detained for very long periods of time. even months or perhaps even years. I've heard of cases in asylum seekers detained for no crime whatsoever, well over 2 years.
Okay. Mark, maybe you could shed some light on what Esther just said. People are kept for a long time. You have your background in INS before you joined HIAS. Why are people held so long?
I think basically a lot of people just get lost between the cracks of this bureaucracy. And that's the sad thing. Esther was telling me before the show about one case where there was a couple from Albania, and they've been detained for almost 2 years now, primarily because the part of the Justice Department, the Board of Immigration Appeals, lost their file for about 18 months, and they were behind bars just wasting away, separated from each other while this was going on. And I have to tell you that coming from the INS and coming from, the government, I have to tell you that that's not as uncommon as it should be.
Oh, so the INS is aware of these type of situations.
Happens all the time. People get lost between the cracks in these bureaucracies, and they waste away behind bars as a result of that. And their only crime is that they fled persecution. They tried to come to the United States.
Tell me a little bit about HIAS and your involvement there.
Sure. We were founded in 1880. We're the oldest immigration and refugee agency in the country. We were founded by immigrants themselves who were kind of very upset at the conditions they saw in Ellis Island in which immigrants were being held. And I'm afraid that 118 years later, as Esther was saying, conditions really have not improved that much, and there's still a great deal of work to be done, and that's what we're doing. We're trying to advocate on behalf of immigrants. As you know,
what would you like to see?
I'd like to see a whole bunch of things. In the first place, people shouldn't be detained just because they're trying to flee persecution. And as a matter of
I'm going to play the devil's advocate here. I'm the INS. You are just telling me your story. I have no proof. You just got off the plane. You want me to just put you into society? That's scary.
Well, INS officers are supposed to be trained in assessing credibility of applicants. And many of these applicants who are behind bars are applicants who have been found to have a credible fear of persecution. These are people that INS has interviewed. The INS officer has said, this person has a credible fear of persecution. He's told me a story, and I believe it, and I think he should be released.
That's very subjective.
And it's subjective, but here you have an INS officer who makes this assessment, and they make a recommendation to the INS district office in Newark or in New York City or whatever the case may be, and the district officer, the district director overrides it, right? And the people are not released. People who are found to have a credible fear of persecution.
Okay.
Right.
You wanted to add something?
Yeah, it's actually, in current law, the INS does have the power to release people who are asylum seekers through a carefully planned program called the Asylum Pre-Screening Officer Program.
What does that mean? Do you have to have family?
That means that people have been, as Mark was saying, have been interviewed by an asylum officer, been found to have credible fear, and if they have a place to stay of either friend or family who agrees to house them for that period of time while they wait for their asylum hearing, then they should, these people can be released. However, it is at the local level that district directors choose not to implement that program. And we need to remember the cost to taxpayers that this is incurring. The average cost per night per detainee is about $65. Now, for say these Albanians, this couple who are still actually in detention as we speak in New Jersey, they have been in for almost 2 years. That is tens of thousands of dollars that the U.S. government has spent because they have lost the files of these people and because they don't feel that they qualify for release. They do have attorneys. Yes, many advocates. There have, been a lot of people trying to help this couple. They were even featured in Marie Claire magazine lately telling their story, they have not been released.
Right. I mean, INS hides behind this veil of discretion that they have.
Okay.
And they refuse to release them, even though the international treaty, the international protocol relating to the status of refugees, the Geneva Convention, which the U.S. signed, specifically says that asylum seekers should not be detained.
Okay. Well, in a sense, what you're saying is true, but I still go back to the fact that when you say they shouldn't be detained, are you saying if they have family, they should be released to them, or they should have another program? Because I think it would be scary to let everybody who comes in and tells a story say, you know, I'm running away because somebody is going to cut off my hair, and said, okay, come, here's a chair, sit down. That is scary. Don't they have a right? I mean, what are you saying when you say release? Are you saying have some program that will keep people for a reasonable time? Is that what you're saying?
Right, it's parole. I mean, you have the right to, to a relatively expedited hearing, and obviously INS can.
Is there a time limit once you enter? Is there a time limit? Like, are you supposed to have a hearing within 2 weeks? And at that point,
you're supposed to have your credible fear interview technically within 48 hours, but sometimes it's up to a week. And it's at that point that you become, if you pass that interview, eligible for release. So that is a determined period of time.
Is that part of it?
Excuse me?
Is the system overburdened? They don't have enough people doing the work.
The system is certainly overburdened.
And that's part of it.
But we think about, the immigration detention program is the fastest growing incarceration program in the United States. And the Immigration Service is just overwhelmed with the number of people that they're actually required to detain. So the fact that they're still detaining asylum seekers whom they're not required to detain for the entire duration of their hearing is very difficult to comprehend.
Let's talk a little bit about the condition itself. Give me a typical detention center.
Well, that's just the thing. There isn't a typical detention center. And actually, that's what I would point to as the main problem. There is very, very little accountability. If you find a problem in a facility and report it, it's very difficult to get some change. Only just last year, just in January of 1997, they passed the first detention standards, 12 standards that regulate the operation of certain facilities. What are people allowed to have in terms of access to their attorneys, access to telephones, access to family visitors? Until 1997, there was no regulation.
The way the system is right now, and I don't mean to cut it, wouldn't that be very hard for them to regulate? Because some of them are kept in jails, some of them are somewhere else.
This is just the thing, that we have a major issue with the implementation of these standards. They do only apply to the facilities that the INS operates. However, the majority of people are actually detained in the jails.
Especially
the INS has shied away from actually trying to get those jails to agree to even some of the standards. To even say, okay, if this person is an asylum seeker and under these regulations, they are allowed to have a consultation with a person of their choice before their interview. They do not agree to guarantee that that person detained in a jail will have that right.
Yeah,
that's simply unfair.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I mean, to complicate the matter, INS has what it kind of cynically calls its Holiday Inn system of detention. And what that means is
breakfast in the morning.
Yeah, it does not include breakfast. It doesn't include the amenities aren't there. The shampoo and the conditioner are not there. What it does mean is that if there's no room in a facility for you, INS will find some jail somewhere that will take you somewhere in the country. And it makes representation very difficult because they have these asylum seekers moving from jail to jail. And it's very difficult to present your case when you're moving around the country.
Are they entitled to attorneys under the law? So who represent them? Do you have to find your own representation?
Contrary to what many people believe, no immigrant in immigration proceedings is guaranteed counsel, representation at government expense. They must They can have a lawyer, but it has to be at their own expense, and they have to find that lawyer. For an immigrant who is in detention, particularly for an asylum seeker who does not perhaps speak English and has never been in a country like the United States before, finding an attorney is an incredibly difficult thing from a jail,
Right.
where you have very limited access to phones. You may only be able to make collect calls. Well, yeah, just exactly that. Very often they're only allowed to make collect calls. And agencies, because there's no guarantee to counsel, it's agencies who are like my own, or actually we don't represent people ourselves, but like HIAS.
Do you make referrals?
We make referrals, we support local groups that do the representation. These are very low budget operations.
Financially?
Yes, we do. We have a small grant program through which we grant agencies small amounts of money to continue their operations. And we try to target groups that are serving, again, the most vulnerable people in detention, asylum seekers.
Okay.
So this is a very difficult procedure, and something we try to work on improving is access to lawyers.
How is HIAS trying to affect change?
Well, we have a team of lawyers in our New York office who do this representation, spend a lot of time at the 2 detention facilities in the area, at Wackenhut, which is the New York facility, and at the Elizabeth Detention Facility. So we actually do advocacy itself.
So how do they find these people? You just go there?
Well, they call us Collect, and we come down and we represent them.
So if somebody watching the show right now can call HIAS?
Yeah, that's
or
correct.
Do you represent certain group of people?
We will represent anybody. We're a Jewish agency, but we will represent anybody, and most of the people we represent in detention, of course, are not Jewish.
Okay. You also mentioned that you have gone to West Africa.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Sure. On a positive note, refugee admissions from Africa traditionally in this country have been very, very low.
Okay.
And very
Why
recently...
was that?
Well, frankly, I think it's because there was no group with political power in the U.S. pushing for higher admissions from Africa.
Are they now?
Now they are. In recent years, the Congressional Black Caucus has gotten very involved in saying, you know, most of the world's refugees, not most, but a lot of the world's refugees are in Africa. Why is it that, you know, for example, in a year when we accept 130,000 refugees a few years back, do we only accept 2,000 from Africa?
Right.
And clearly that system was unfair. And so while in 1997 we only accepted 7,000 refugees from Africa, which was more than we had traditionally accepted, this year, in 1998, we are allowing up to 12,000 refugees to come in. So that's a very positive change.
In Eastern Europe, I was looking at the thing, and they have the largest, about 25,000.
Right.
And I thought, okay, but that's interesting, and I'm glad that perhaps, you know, they're increasing the number so more people will get help. But let's face it, America cannot absorb everybody. You know, they cannot take on everyone's problem. And some of these stories are very creative. Okay? One of the reasons why I contacted your group to do this show was because I saw a young lady from West Africa who apparently was afraid of female genital mutilation. She's behind bars now or in detention. From where she comes from, you know, and the people that I've spoken to, that practice is really not done. So, and I'm not saying that what she's saying is a lie. I'm just saying that there is the tendency that people tend to copy things that are popular. I mean, there's no political instability in one nation, so let me take the next best thing.
Right.
Doesn't the INS have the right to make sure that, you know?
Do they have the right to detain somebody for well over a year? I think I know the individual that you're speaking of, Adelaida Bankwa, is that it? Yeah, she's been in detention for, I believe, since March of 1997. That's a really long time, regardless of her asylum claim, to be holding her. You know, and actually I've spoken with people at the Women's Commission for Refugee Women and Children. According to their research, in her country, the practice of female genital mutilation does exist, and that the danger that she would be in returning to her country right now, according to the police, could not be controlled to protect her, and that's a qualification for asylum.
I'm not going to debate that issue, but it's interesting. I am from that country, and you have visited Africa. I don't know how well you know Africa, but there are tribes and there are regions, and we have names that I can tell where somebody's from just by mentioning the name. And if the name you are mentioning is what I'm hearing, I just don't know. I mean, I can understand somebody coming from the north saying, because usually the Muslim countries do this, but the Christian part, which is the southern part of the country, some of us find it very, very difficult to understand. But anyway, we're not debating the merit of it. My point though is that how is the INS supposed to decipher through this and say this person really has a credible fear, and after they find out that you don't have a credible fear, why don't people accept and say, okay, let me go back and try again? Because I think most people fight this, and through fighting, that's how they end up in jail for a long time. Am I right?
No, because they're simply across the board. They look at people's claims and they'll say that certain people's claims are, valid and okay. We believe this person has a good chance to get asylum, but they're all detained. In the New York district, they're all detained. That's the policy that we have an issue with.
Right, that's a problem.
Across the board.
Is you'll have asylum officers saying, I believe this person, the person's fear is credible, and then they recommend to the district director this person should be released. The district director, for all the cases in New York, and for most of the cases in Newark, apparently says, sorry, we're not going to release this person. Period.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, you're right. It's INS's job to figure out if someone's claim is credible or not. That's their job. But if the person's fear is credible, they should not detain that person. They should release that person. If the person's fear is not credible, that's a different story. And it's a tough job.
Let's talk about another thing. You had mentioned that there are some countries that people will say, okay, fine, you didn't meet the credible fear standard, whatever it is, for the category that you've chosen. We want to take you back home. They can't go because the U.S. have no relations with that country or with those countries. So the person ends up in jail. And we were talking about Cuba. Could you, bring it up a little bit about the Cuban issue? Because I think that's interesting. And also, do you know if there are people out there fighting for such injustice? Because I really think it is.
Yeah, but there are organizations out there working on it. The issue is simply that once somebody has been detained and found to be deportable, they've been ordered deported. At that point, the Immigration Service, and correct me if I'm wrong, because you've worked with the service, has to secure travel documents for each individual to return to their country. For certain countries, like Cuba, as you've mentioned, also in Vietnam, Cambodia, certain other countries across the United States, they either don't have diplomatic relations or that government is just reluctant or unwilling to take that person back, or just across the board doesn't want to take people back. The Immigration Service right now is just detaining people in that situation for an indefinite period of time.
And that could be
years and years. It could be any amount of time. Now we feel that that's a severe injustice, because just think about, for somebody who has committed a crime in the United States. Now, granted, some of these people did commit a certain crime in the United States. Now, we could argue, and go into the fact that the law makes many people deportable now who've committed actually very minor crimes and in the distant past. But for somebody who's committed a crime, they know they have a certain amount of time to spend in jail. They actually also know why they're there, right?
But this one you don't have.
This one you don't have any idea, and you feel that it's useless.
Right.
You know, you're in
we're running out of time, so I'm going to cut you. I don't mean to, but we're running out of time. I want to find out some of the projects you are working on right now.
Okay. We're advocating on a number of issues right now in Washington. Number one is the naturalization process. There are 2 million people with green cards right now in line to become U.S. citizens. They have to expect to wait more than 2 years just for INS to process their paperwork.
Why is that?
Because, again, the bureaucracy is a mess. It's totally backlogged. And we feel this is no way to welcome new citizens into our society.
So what is your organization doing about it?
Well, we're pushing for INS to, fix the process, to make it work better. We're pushing for more appropriated money for INS. Yes, we got $171 million for INS in appropriated dollars last year, which was a very nice surprise. And we meet with INS every month to press them on reforming the system, and we're hoping that sooner or later we're going to see some results.
Okay. What are some of the other things?
We're also fighting right now to try to protect asylum seekers and try to bring more refugees into the country. Under the Clinton administration, the number of refugees who have come to the U.S. has gone down by 41%. The Republican administrations were actually much more generous when it came to protecting people who are fleeing from persecution.
Okay.
So we're trying to get President Clinton to renew our American tradition of welcoming refugees to our shores.
Okay. Is there anything that you want to highlight that you're working on right now?
Well, we're working to improve conditions, get standards to apply to all detention facilities, including jails. We have discussions on a regular basis with the Immigration Service and with other government agencies, such as the agency that operates with the immigration courts. We try to make sure that people have access to legal materials and also get rights information about their rights and why they're in detention.
You had mentioned also that there may be someone out there with a green card who may have committed a crime a long time ago, and INS can come after you. We have about a minute. Could you elaborate on that? Because I thought that was interesting.
Sure. This is basically the issue here is that the harshness of the new immigration law that makes people who are legal permanent residents who may have U.S. citizen spouse, U.S. citizen children, eligible or not eligible, they make them mandatorily detained. They must be detained if they have committed a certain crime, no matter how long ago. Like there was a case of a man who had been spent maybe a year on probation because he had used marijuana or been caught selling marijuana. He's been a legal permanent resident for 19 years. He was deported to his country, and after he was deported, his son actually committed suicide, and his wife, a U.S. citizen.
We are out of time. Oh, time flies. Thank you very much, Mark, for being here. Thank you, Esther.
Thank
this
you.
is Ajimai for Talk New York. Please, if you want to contact Esther's organization, the Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service, and the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, please, their number and their website address will be on the screen. This is Yajima Okwampahofe. Thanks for watching.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Major funding for this program has been provided by Ghana Airways.
Ghana Airways. almost 40 years, Ghana Airways has been linking West Africa to the rest of the world. Your number one choice to West Africa.